So this is going to be quite of a different video because we're not talking about iPhones or iPads or Samsung phones or upcoming laptops. Instead, I'll be covering all the latest leaks and rumors and everything we currently know about a Sony PlayStation 5. So when is the PlayStation 5 coming out? What specs is the PlayStation 5 going to come with? Will it support PS4 games? Will it run games in 4K 60 without upscaling? Will Sony introduce a new PSVR? So many questions. So grab some snacks, sit back, and enjoy. Okay, so first things first, when is the PlayStation 5 going to be released? I think this is what most of you care about the most. Well, the original PlayStation, the PS1, came out in 1994, and 6 years later, in 2000, the PS2 was released. And then 6 more years later, in 2006, Sony unveiled the PlayStation 3, and then 7 years later, in 2013, Sony unveiled the PlayStation 4. So it seems that Sony has a preference for releasing a new console every 6 or 7 years. So in theory, the PlayStation 5 should be released in either 2019 or 2020. However, something very surprising and unexpected happened in 2016 when Sony unveiled and released the PlayStation 4 Pro only 3 years after the PS4. And the PS4 Pro was in fact a brand new console because it came with a new design, a brand new design, updated specs. So because of this, the PS5 is either going to be released in 2020, so 7 years after the original PS4 came out, or possibly even in 2021. Now, Sony's PlayStation leader, Shane Layden, he confirmed that the PlayStation 5 is already in development, so that's some amazing news. PS5 confirmed should be the title of this video, but he didn't specify a release date, unfortunately. Now, Damien Tong, however, he's an analyst who correctly predicted the PS4 Pro and also the PS4 Slim in 2016. He said that the PS5 would actually arrive in the second half of 2018, so this year, essentially, which would be awesome. However, some other analysts, they pointed towards 2020 as the release date for the PS5. And honestly, this is what I believe personally to be the case as well, since the PS4 was released not 6 years, but actually 7 years after the PS3 came out. So I don't see the PS5 being released anytime sooner than 7 years after the PS4, especially considering that the PS4 Pro came out in mid-cycle. So 7 years would be exactly in 2020, essentially, which would mean a possible 2019 unveil at E3 in June, or if not, a 2020 unveil and release. Okay, so I've talked about the release date. Now, what about the performance? How powerful and what specs is the PS5 going to come with? Well, if you take a look at a PS3, this one came out in 2006. When it was released, it was actually the world's most powerful console at that time. However, the PS3 actually came with a quite unique processor. It was a cell processor architecture, which developers had some really serious issues developing games for at first. And because of that, cross-platform games looked actually significantly better on the Xbox 360 during the first few years, rather than on the PS3. However, first-party titles launched a few years later, so exclusives such as God of War 3, Uncharted 3, not even to mention The Last of Us, those games looked outstanding since the developers got better at developing apps and games for the cell processor, and essentially those games were actually using almost 100% of the PS3's performance. So they looked outstanding when compared to, cross-platform games that actually looked better on the Xbox 360 than the PS3, even though the PS3 was more powerful. But then the PS4 was quite of a different story. So it actually came with a more modern AMD processor. And actually the architecture was x86-64 instead of that old cell architecture. So essentially developing games for the PS4 was the same as developing games for a standard PC. And same as with the PS3, the PS4 was still the world's most powerful console at launch. It was an awesome console. Games were significantly easier to develop for. And then when the PS4 Pro was released, the whole idea essentially that Sony had behind the PS4 Pro was that they wanted to make a console for people who had a 4K monitor or a 4K television. And yes, the PS4 Pro does support 4K resolution, and some games actually run in 4K, but that's like less than 10 games, so not a lot of them actually run in true 4K. The majority of the games actually use a technique called checkerboarding. So essentially the PS4 Pro renders a lower resolution image such as 1080p or sometimes, if you're lucky, 1440p. And then analyzes the missing pixels for a 4K image based on the existing pixels already in the image and fills in the missing pixels essentially by approximation. So even though a checkerboarded 1440p image won't be as sharp as 4K, as true 4K, it's actually really, really close. Now, the PS4 Pro can, by the way, do true 4K 60 in some games, but those are like just a few games such as The Last of Us or Wipeout, the new Wipeout remastered, but keep in mind that those games are actually PS3 games remastered for the PS4, so they're not even current-gen games. That's why they can actually run in true 4K 60. Now, the Xbox One X is a much more powerful console than the PS4 Pro. So this was released by Microsoft as their answer to Sony's Pro, essentially. And the X can do true 4K 60 in quite a few more games than the PS4 Pro can, such as Forza 7, for example, but not much other than that. So long story short, the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, even though they do have the power to be next-generation consoles, kinda, they're not, simply because all the games that work on the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, they also work on the original Xbox One and the PS4 as well. So essentially those consoles are being held back by the PS4 and the Xbox One. But the PlayStation 5 is going to be a completely new generation of consoles, which means that we'll see PlayStation 5 exclusive games which will take full advantage of the new hardware and will be made just for the PS5 from the beginning. So you'll see discs with PS5 in store rather than, PS4 games that work on the PS4 and the PS4 Pro. So what about the actual specs? So in terms of the CPU, the Xbox One X actually uses a custom-made 8-core 2.3 GHz CPU made by AMD. Now, most likely the PS5 is still going to come with an AMD processor just like the PS4 Pro does. Custom made, of course. Now, in terms of the RAM, the Xbox One X comes with 12 gigabytes of GDDR5 memory, so possibly 16 gigabytes GDDR5 on the PS5. In terms of the GPU, the PS4 Pro actually uses an AMD Polaris-based GPU with 4.12 teraflops of GPU compute power and 218 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth. Now, the Xbox One X actually uses something pretty similar, so it's still a custom-made AMD GPU, still Polaris-based, but it comes with a much higher memory bandwidth of 326 gigabytes per second and also 6 teraflops of GPU compute power. So this is actually pretty similar to an AMD 580 GPU, and it's actually really close in performance to GTX 1060. So not bad. So the PlayStation 5 will most probably continue Sony's partnership with AMD. So this means a GPU made by AMD as well as the CPU. Now, on the GPU side, we'll probably see a Vega GPU, or most likely a future architecture from AMD which hasn't been announced yet. Most likely not Navy, by the way, but definitely something with HBM2 memory. So HBM2 memory is most likely coming, actually definitely coming, I would say, on the PlayStation 5, but probably not the Navy architecture. Either Vega or something that's coming after Navy, which we don't know anything about because AMD hasn't said anything about what's coming after Navy. And an article posted by Tweaktown shows an interesting conversation that the writer had with an anonymous source from Sony, and that source said that the PS5 will not feature an APU like the Xbox One X, but most likely a dedicated GPU. So yes, do expect to see a custom-made Vega GPU or a future architecture with HBM2 memory. And finally, something which I do hope is coming with the PS5 is an SSD. Honestly, an SSD to speed up the load times. So the PS4 Pro, I'm not sure how many of you know this, but the PS4 Pro does support SATA 3, but even if you do use an SSD on the PS4 Pro, you won't be getting the exact same speeds you would on a PC. So instead of getting up to 600 megabytes per second, which is what SATA 3 supports, you actually get up to about 150, which is a, well, surprising difference. So this is because there's not enough bandwidth allocated to the SATA connection. So I do see this being fixed with the PS5 with a more powerful processor. So hopefully this is fixed with the PS5. I'm not counting on it, but hopefully we'll get much better speeds when it comes to SSDs in the PS5. So a full SSD out of the box would of course be amazing, but a hybrid drive for more storage is most likely going to be the case, as a hybrid drive or SSH is essentially the best of both worlds. Obviously, I don't think anyone would prefer having a PS5 with 256 gigabytes of storage rather than a PS5 with 2 terabytes and a hybrid drive. So this is most likely going to be the case, a 2 terabyte hybrid drive in the PS5. USB Type-C, at least on a controller, is most likely going to be the standard when it comes to the charging port. And speaking of a controller, yes, there is going to be a brand new redesigned PS5 controller, just as expected, but we don't know any details on that yet. So it's probably going to be a much higher quality controller, as at the moment the Xbox One X controller, it does feel a bit more premium than the PS4 Pro one. But other than more premium material, I'm not sure what to expect from the PS5 controller, because if you take a look at the PS3 versus the PS4 controller, the PS4 controller was a massive change over the PS3 one, but then the PS3 one wasn't that big of a change over the PS2 one, and the PS2 one wasn't that big of a change from the PS1 one. So I don't know, I don't think big changes are coming to the controller, because the PS4 one is really good, but more premium materials and a more premium feel is something which I think is definitely needed. And then when it comes to the actual design of the PS5, we don't know exactly how this is going to look like because the design hasn't been finalized yet. But if you take a look at a PS3 and a PS4 and a PS4 Pro, they all have a really interesting design, a much better design, at least in my opinion, than the original Xbox One. Now, the Xbox One X and the Xbox One S, especially in white, they look amazing, much better than the PS4 Pro and the PS4. So with the PS5, do expect to see an interesting design rather than a blocky, boxy design that Microsoft usually goes for in the Xbox, hence its name. We've actually made two concepts for the PlayStation 5, so this is how we think it's going to look like. But again, these are just concepts, not how the PS5 is actually going to look like, because the design hasn't been finalized yet. So not even Sony knows, probably not, how it's going to look like PS5 in the next few years. Okay, now let's say that you get a PS5 and you still want to play your old PS4 games. So will the PS5 be backwards compatible with the PS4 and the PS4 Pro games, since, you know, the PS4 wasn't actually compatible with PS3 games unless you used PS Now, which was essentially streaming your games off of Sony's PS3 service. And yeah, you also had to pay for this thing, and the graphics quality wasn't that great anyway. Well, probably yes, because if you take a look at the PS5, it's going to run on the exact same CPU architecture as the PS4 and the PS4 Pro currently run on, so x86-64, which means that the PS4 and the PS4 Pro games should be compatible right out of the box with the PS5. But no, don't expect any patches for the PS5, so any patched games essentially, so that the graphics look better on the PS5, since this would require quite a lot of extra work from the developers, which in the end would cost money. And speaking of money, how much is the PS5 going to cost? How expensive or how cheap is this thing going to be? Well, if you take a look at the Xbox One X, yes, this thing is the world's most powerful console at the moment, but it's also the world's most expensive console at the moment, starting at $500 or £450 in UK, versus the PS4 Pro, which starts at $400 or £350 in the UK, which is exactly the same price the PS4 Pro, the original PS4 started at. Well, essentially Sony even stated that the sole reason why they haven't made the PS4 Pro more powerful was because of the cost and the form factor. They wanted to keep the cost low, and they also wanted to keep the PS4 Pro in a thoroughly compact and small form factor. They didn't want to turn this into a gaming PC size, for example. Now, I would personally always pick performance over cost. So I would love to see what Sony could put into a, let's say, $1,000 or £1,000 PlayStation 5, because here's the thing, consoles are actually holding PC games back. So most games, I'm not sure how many of you know this, but most games are actually developed on consoles and only then ported to PCs. So even if you have a GTX 1080 Ti, for example, even though that card could achieve essentially significantly better graphics than a PS4 Pro could, the games look the same, more or less, on both, apart from the true 4K resolution and 60 frames per second on PC, #PC Master Race. But I mean, apart from that, in terms of visual quality alone, and visual effects, they're pretty much identical. So having more powerful consoles would actually solve this issue. But let me know in the comments, what do you guys think about all this? Would you actually pay £1,000 or $1,000 for a console or not? I'm guessing most of you will probably say, no way, Jose. But if you think about it, you're already paying $800 or even more for a high-end smartphone. And some people change their smartphones every single year, or most people every 2 years. You'll only change your console once every 6 years or even 7 years. So if you put it like this, $1,000 for the next 6 years for an amazing console, a console with some amazing graphics, doesn't sound too bad, does it? But yeah, definitely subscribe if you want to see more Leaks and Rumors episodes like this one. And also don't forget to enable notifications on my channel by simply tapping on that bell icon so that you get notified whenever a brand new video, a brand new cool, epic video comes out. But yeah, other than that, also let me know in the comments what you guys think about the PlayStation 5. Do you think it's going to be worth it over a PC? Because if you take a look at the Xbox One X, it's comparable to a mid-range PC with an AMD 580 GPU, or even a 1060. It's really close to the 1060's performance, so it's quite good. Yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys think about the PS5. And other than that, this has been pretty much it for Big Zio. Like, if you enjoyed it, let me know. Daniel, that was a pretty fast-spoken outro. I'm Daniel, signing out. Cool. See you guys in the next one. This was an awkward outro. As always, see you guys in the next video. Daniel, signing out. Cheers.